a group of friends, and then a bunch of our players, we'd all go out and eat pizza after the games, and you play every night. Legion baseball was an every night thing, and we just developed a really strong friendship from that, which developed into a kind of a relationship from that.
How did it morph from one to the other?
Well,
there weren't, in that generation, there wasn't really that much of guys and young ladies being friends per se. There wasn't as much of it as there is today.
That's right. In fact, with my own children, it's totally different. There was more formal dating. There was more calling her up and asking her out and meeting her parents and that sort of thing. So that happened, and we did that. But we grew fond of each other pretty quickly.
Right.
But she went to North Carolina State while I was at Appalachian State. So we had a little commuter relationship, and which included sometimes her driving 2 hours west and me driving 2 hours east, and
for a clandestine
for a little rendezvous in Greensboro, Winston-Salem,
right?
And that's how we got through college. We didn't. I'm trying to think. Yeah, that's how we got through college, and we were.
So did this relationship stay solid? Did you?
It did. Well, there like any, which ended up being long term because this was the start of her college, and I'd been in college for a year. Like anything else, I mean, there were those moments where you need to be sure, and But look, it's not like we were married in college or anything. We decided to let's get through college, see how we both feel, and see where we land afterwards. And by the time we were through college, and we wanted to start professionally. She ended up with a horticulture major at NC State, and I was an English major at App. So it was just a matter of, finding our place. Unlike our parents, who maybe I won't speak for you, but at least in our generation, once you found a relationship, then you got you made the connection, and then you got the job, and then you planted the seeds. I think with Karen and I, that was still largely still the case, except we wanted to be sure we were both kind of on our feet professionally before we got married, because I think in the course of us dating through college, it was becoming apparent that we were going to end up together.
Right. And when did you end up getting married?
Well, we ended up getting married on well, there's a little story behind that.
Oh, that sounds good. That's what we're looking for here.
There's a story here. We ended up getting married in June of 1984. We were living together in Virginia, in Roanoke. I was working at the Roanoke Times.
And that was your first
job
professional
out of college.
Right.
And she was working in Virginia as well. We were living together. And we decided, as long as we're living together, we should be married. Mm-hmm. So we got in the car and we drove to Charleston, South Carolina. We got a justice of the peace, and we went to the courtyard of the Meeting Street Inn, and we got married.
And did anybody know that this was going to occur?
For a year, nobody knew that it had happened.
Wow.
And so we continued to live together, and only she and I knew we were married.
And why the secrecy?
Well, there's a reason for that.
Okay.
I was a poor sports writer, and she was a poor, she's kind of a maintenance worker for a resort, and we needed the gifts. So in May of 1985, we had a big wedding ceremony in North Carolina.
I got you. So you had this all planned out. Well, we'll get married now, but we will have a wedding.
We did the wedding as much for our parents and family as much as anything. We didn't want to deny them that.
So was there some moment where you told everyone, or did it sort of leak out?
It kind of leaked out.
Did you say it by accident?
Well, I'll tell you what, not for years. For years, none of our family knew. We didn't feel the need to tell them. We didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings about that.
I mean, for years, that they thought that the wedding was the day you got married.
And when she was
That's really fascinating.
When she was in her wedding gown and I was in my tux, the only people who knew that we were already married was her and I and the priest. We got married in the Catholic Church. We didn't feel like we should lie to him.
Right.
So we basically eloped, and then kept it secret for as much as a decade after we were married, and then we kind of let people know that We kept getting anniversary cards for the ceremony and
for the wrong date.
That's right.
That's funny.
Yeah.
So you almost have two anniversaries.
Yeah,
as it were.
Yeah, we make sure to kiss each other on each day.
How soon did you start or decide to start to have a family?
So, worked in Roanoke, Virginia for 8 years. 1981, I got to the Roanoke Times and covered high school sports for a couple of years, and then small colleges, and then Virginia Tech. So I was there for the last 2 years of Bill Dooley as the football coach, and the first 2 years of Frank Beamer as the football coach there. And Karen was actually, while I was covering Virginia Tech, Karen went and got her master's degree at Tech in horticulture. So our sense was we've invested in her education. She had a hell of a lot more potential than I did. She was going to go on the nationwide job search, and I was going to follow her. Newspaper jobs were easy.
Right.
Then, I mean, I'll go wherever you want to go, and I'll get a job. Well, she ended up getting a job at the University of Missouri Extension Service on the it's off 291 Highway, and we took it. And we no kids then. We were been married for 3 or 4 years, depending on what date you want to use. and so
what is a horticulture degree, or what do you do?
Well, she was able to parlay that into extension service. People who understand the sort of the
which I don't
agriculture world. The extension service is basically a plant and tree information center. People have issues with yards or with trees, with whatever. They come and these are people with the knowledge. So her job is what got me out here. And once that move was made, then we decided, well, now this is where I will get a job. I'll follow you out and get a job, and this is where we'll start the family. We'll begin our family in Kansas City, and so we're late 20s now, age-wise, and just as she got the job in Kansas City, I got a raise and a promotion at the newspaper in Roanoke, and I thought, man, I'm making more money than ever, and I got to give this up for some.
I was going to ask if there was any, because you had a plan, but then maybe this threw a monkey wrench into the plan.
It did a little bit, and there was nothing immediate that was available at the Star. And I was actually in contact with Joe McGuff, who was the editor of the Star at the time, and he just said, look, we appreciate your circumstances. We'd love to hire. We don't have anything for you at the moment. I said, oh, well, darn. So we moved Karen to Kansas City on the weekend of Kansas winning the Final Four in '88.
Wow.
And then I went back to Virginia. We got her set up an apartment here, and so we were married and living apart. So I'm covering Virginia Tech football the year of 1988, and they had a great road schedule that year, and so she and I were able to rendezvous in New Orleans, Pittsburgh, Louisville. We had a great time. Basketball team was playing in D.C. She came, and so we had great weekends in these cities, being married and everything. But I said, after basketball season, I'm coming out whether I have a job or not.
Right.
So I did. I came out to Kansas City in April of '89, and it turns out within a few weeks after getting here, people whose names Tom Chattel and Dennis Dodd, left the Star and to help start a newspaper over in St. Louis, the St. Louis Sun. It was the National, a national newspaper, and they both were hired.
Right.
Well, that opened up jobs at the Star, and I got hired in the summer of '89, and then I always tell people I got a job, we bought a house, and we had our first kid within like a month in 1989.
You became the Kansas beat writer fairly soon.
Yeah, almost immediately. And so I always say when I got here in '89, I think of it as a big transition year in Kansas City, because that's when Marty Schottenheimer and Carl Peterson, that was their first year with the Chiefs. It was the last year that the Royals were really competitive. That was the Brett Saberhagen Cy Young year.
Right.
Bill Snyder's first year at K-State, Glenn Mason's and Roy Williams' second year at KU. So it was really a change year for a year that would set the tone for the next decade or so. So I got here in '89, and the first thing I did, I got the job they hired me for was to cover high schools in Johnson County. That's the thing that came open while they figured out what to do with the college beats. But about halfway through the college football season, they figured, no, we need to get this thing taken care of.
Right.
So they put me on Kansas and Kansas State. I covered both of them. So I'd pick the game that I want to cover, usually whatever we thought the most interest was. Both programs at the time were terrible. Even Snyder's, remember Snyder's first year.
Right.
Second year was the same deal. Cover whatever football game you wanted to cover, figure out what basketball game you could work out into the schedule. So for 2 years, I was covering KU and K-State as a beat writer, while I got hired within a month of Jeffrey Flanagan and Adam Teicher at the Star. And Jeff was the Missouri beat guy, and Adam was sort of an enterprise writer who became the Chiefs writer. So that was sort of the setup early. But after 2 years, they decided KU and K-State needed to be separated as a beat, and I took over and I was the Kansas guy. And that was, people remember, at least in football, the Tony Sands era that turned into the Gilbert Brown, Chris Mamalanga, that team. And then in basketball, of course, starting with the first KU basketball team I covered was the 89-90 season, the year that Missouri, Kansas, and Oklahoma all traded number one for about 8 weeks. And so I had that for about 7 or 8 years, and basically until the Big 12 was formed. And then that shifted my responsibility.
Just a couple of personalities you mentioned there. Relationship with Roy Williams from the start.
Yeah. It's funny. I thought that I would have a kind of an in with him because he's from North Carolina, right? And I remember trying to go set up some personal time with him. 15 minutes in his office, just him and I. Well, I got a few minutes with him, and we talked about that, and we knew we had so many common, acquaintances from Chapel Hill and Raleigh, but it didn't do me much good on the beat. He treated everybody about the same,
right?
But I enjoyed covering Roy, and I always thought well of Roy, and I'll never forget when I got the last game that I covered as the Kansas beat guy was their loss to Arizona in Birmingham, that horrible Sweet 16 loss.
There.
Yeah, you remember how that was? It was the worst locker room I've ever been. The most tearful, wailing locker room I'd ever been in, losing locker room. And I wrote a story. About how kind of a failure of a season, a glorious season that ended in failure. And that was the last game I wrote. And Roy knew that was my last game on the beat. So he wrote me a letter a few weeks later. I still have it. That said, look, I wanted to say I appreciate working with you for these many years, and I always appreciate the job that you did. And then he spent the next 2 pages ripping me for characterizing the season as a failure, which
I think is sort of the yin and yang of Roy, because I always got along with him when I covered Kansas as well. But many people who were on the beat really didn't like him.
No, that's right. I think I kind of because I grew up with Dean Smith and North Carolina and kind of knowing how that operated, I saw a lot of the same thing, the same objectives that Roy was, trying to employ at Kansas. I think I understood it, and look, he was winning. I mean, he was winning big and winning in a way, consistent way for Kansas that Larry Brown wasn't there long enough to do, and Ted Owens certainly didn't do. So, I mean, you might have to go back to the 20s or the 30s to find a time that when Kansas was winning from 90 to 97, the years that I covered him, in such a way. I didn't. He was graduating players. No, he had his issues. There were some guys some bad seeds that he recruited, or guys that he inherited and turned out to be bad seeds.
But generally, he had good kids.
He did, the good kids. They're good kids, and nobody loves his kids more than Roy loves his kids. That's what he says that at the end of every NCAA tournament loss. So I appreciated him for what he was. And appreciate's not the right word. I understood him for what he was. When I covered Kansas, I never had to worry about the end of the year, is Roy going to leave? Every beat writer just fears that time when the coach they're covering is leaving, and they got to cover a coaching search because that's just misery. And the closest Roy ever, I think, he came was the Lakers called him after one of those years, and he talked to the Lakers. But no, I think it was because Mitch Kupchak was the old Carolina guy, was GM. But no, I thought we got along okay.
Glenn Mason, I didn't get along with.
I think I remember that. I mean,
we had a lot of sparring that went on at press conferences. That doesn't mean that, but I had no relationship with him otherwise. That's all I knew. What was he like as a beat writer on the inside?
I thought he was. We got along great. I just sort of liked his gruffness. He's from New Jersey. I lived in Jersey. I I can remember at a press conference one time, he gave a non-answer, and I told him that. I said in the press conference, that's not even an answer. And he goes, it's the only one I'm going to give you. and I thought afterwards, we didn't stay mad. He didn't stay mad. I think he kind of appreciated being challenged a little bit.
Right.